From years of anxiety to warrior and mentor, Bradley Robinson created the Anxiety Project to help you end your anxiety naturally. Let's mold the new you and let's end anxiety together.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Anxiety Project podcast. Welcome to 309. I am Brad Robinson. I'm sure you've noticed, but periodically this month I've been away and I haven't uploaded a new one. Last week I didn't, and the week before I did. I think it was 307 was a new one, but it's only because I've been very busy at home and finding the time now has been increasingly more difficult because of the not newborn, but 4.5 month-year-old baby that Maggie and I are, contending with, I guess you can say. And it's been wonderful. The responsibility has been amazing, but it's been, difficult because every time I find time, I'm cleaning and organizing the house and trying to get that life in order, because I believe personally that I have to get my life in order first before I can help all of you out there in the world. Because if I'm not mentally well, how can I possibly help and coach all of you out in the world? So I really appreciate you tuning in. Even though it's a rerun, I try and post really good episodes, even though they're all good in my opinion. I work really hard on them. I'm trying to get the really good ones out to you guys so that you can enjoy each and every week. But here we are. It's a new episode and I'm really excited because we're talking about meaning. Meaning is something I feel like I'm going to search for the rest of my life, and I've found a lot of tidbits along the way and eye-opening revelations around what meaning really is and what it means. What it really means. And so today I'm going to talk about Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning. One of the very first self-help books I picked up because it had the word meaning in it. And I was looking for it because I was suffering deeply from anxiety. But I'm going to talk about a passage here, and I'm going to read this to you because it's really, really good. It's really profound, and I think it'll shed light on what it means to suffer. Because he was in the concentration camp. He was sent to Auschwitz, and what he found there was, I think, meaning. He found meaning in the suffering. And so he says here, in spite of all the enforced physical and mental primitiveness of the life in a concentration camp, it was possible for spiritual life to deepen. Sensitive people who were used to a rich intellectual life may have suffered much pain. They were often of a delicate constitution, but the damage to their inner selves was less. They were able to retreat from their terrible surroundings to a life of inner riches and spiritual freedom. Only in this way can one explain the apparent paradox that some prisoners of a less hardy makeup often seem to survive camp life better than did those of a robust nature. In order to make myself clear, I am forced to fall back on personal experience. Let me tell what happened on those early mornings when we had to march to our work site. There were shouted commands: detachment, forward, march, left, 2, 3, 4, left, 2, 3, 4, first man about, left and left and left and left, caps off. These words sound in my ears even now. At the order, caps off, we passed the gate of the camp, and searchlights were trained upon us. Whoever did not march smartly got a kick, and worse off was the man who, because of the cold, had pulled his cap back over his ears before permission was given. We stumbled on in the darkness over big stones and through large puddles along the one road leading from the camp. The accompanying guards kept shouting at us and driving us with the butts of their rifles. Anyone with very sore feet supported himself on his neighbor's arm. Hardly a word was spoken. The icy wind did not encourage talk. Hiding his mouth behind his upturned collar, the man marching next to me whispered suddenly, "If our wives could see us now. I do hope they are better off in their camps and don't know what is happening to us." That brought thoughts of my own wife to mind. And as we stumbled on for miles, slipping on icy spots, supporting each other time and time again, dragging one another up and onward, nothing was said, but we both knew each of us was thinking of his wife. Occasionally, I looked at the sky, where the stars were fading and the pink light of the morning was beginning to spread behind a dark bank of clouds. But my mind clung to my wife's image, imagining it with an uncanny acuteness. I heard her answering me, saw her smile, her frank and encouraging look. Real or not, her look was then more luminous than the sun which it was beginning to rise. A thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it is set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers, the truth that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. Then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love, and in love. I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved. In a position of utter desolation, when man cannot express himself in positive action, when his only achievement may consist of enduring his sufferings in the right way, an honorable way. In such a position, man can, through loving contemplation of the image he carries of his beloved, achieve fulfillment. For the first time in my life, I was able to understand the meaning of the words, "The angels are lost in perpetual contemplation of an infinite glory." My mind still clung to the image of my wife. A thought crossed my mind. I didn't even know if she was still alive. I knew only one thing, which I have learned well by now. Love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in his spiritual being, his inner self. Whether or not he is actually present, whether or not he is still alive at all, ceases somehow to be of importance. I did not know whether my wife was alive, and I had no means of finding out. During all my prison life, there was no outgoing or incoming mail. But at the moment, it ceased to matter. There was no need for me to know. Nothing could touch the strength of my love, my thoughts, and the image of my beloved. Had I known then that my wife was dead, I think that I would still have given myself undisturbed by the knowledge to the contemplation of her image, and that my mental conversation with her would have been just as vivid and just as satisfying. Set me like a seal upon thy heart. Love is as strong as death. The intensification of inner life helped the prisoner find a refuge from the emptiness, desolation, and spiritual poverty of his existence by letting him escape into the past. When given free rein, his imagination played with past events, often not important ones, but minor happenings and trifling things. His nostalgic memory glorified them, and they assumed a strange character. Their world and their existence seemed very distant, and the spirit reached out for them longingly. In my mind, I took bus rides, unlocked the front door of my apartment, answered my telephone, switched on the electric lights. Our thoughts often centered on such details, and these memories could move us to tears. As the inner life of the prisoner tended to become more intense, he also experienced the beauty of art and nature as never before. Under the influence, he sometimes even forgot his own frightful circumstances. If someone had seen our faces on the journey from Auschwitz to a Bavarian camp, as we beheld the mountains of Salzburg with their summits glowing in the sunset through the little barred windows of the prison carriage, he would never have believed that those were the faces of men who had given up all hope of life and liberty. Despite the factor, or maybe because of it, we were carried away by nature's beauty, which we had missed for so long. In camp, too, a man might draw the attention of a comrade working next to him to a nice view of the setting sun shining through the tall trees of the Bavarian woods. The same woods in which we had built an enormous hidden munitions plant. Another time, we were back at work in a trench. The dawn was gray around us, gray was the sky above, gray the snow in the pale light of dawn, gray the rags in which my fellow prisoners were clad, and gray their faces. I was again conversing silently with my wife, or perhaps I was struggling to find the reason for my suffering, my slow dying, in a last violent protest against the hopelessness of immediate death. I sensed my spirit piercing through the enveloping gloom. I felt it. I felt it transcend that hopeless, meaningless world. And from somewhere I heard a victorious yes in order to my question of existence, of an ultimate purpose. And so that's that passage. Yeah, that's profound. He discovered, I would say, that the mind is the most powerful thing of all. The images that we hold up, the idols, the memories, the vision of our ideal self are insanely powerful. I say this all the time on the show. There's no difference between what you imagine and the emotion associated with it. You know, your brain thinks it's real. Your unconscious doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And so through the suffering, he would bring about in his mind images of beauty, and that comforted him. And also he noticed in the camps that the prisoners who would give up hope and die, they were relying on something, on someone to save them. And Viktor noticed that it was the prisoners that survived viewed their suffering as something honorable. He mentioned that in that passage, something honorable and something that would bring out the ideal self from within, that they could contend with ultimate suffering, contending with the cross. And there's a scene in 127 hours. I think he also talked about the Aaron Ralston who was trapped behind a boulder. You know, he was hiking I can't remember. I've read the book a long time ago. He was hiking and then he fell down a ravine or whatever it's called, a crack in the mountain, in the ridge, and a boulder was trapped his arm in the rock, and he had to amputate his arm to get out of that, and he did, like, days after he got trapped, he amputated his own arm and he managed to escape. But in the movie, there was a great scene where he saw his future son in his mind. He imagined his future son running into his arms, and told himself, I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. There's a future out there. There's somebody who's out there that it's potential coming into being in his own mind. And that's what drove him to go through the most extreme pain he could ever endure. David Goggins, going through SEAL training, he talks about this 1 second decision when you're under extreme suffering and the mind wants to get out and leave and quit. There is this moment where he would imagine the consequences. He would imagine him taking that hot shower. He's shivering on the beach and he's in the lake, unbelievably uncomfortable and stressed beyond imagining. He would imagine taking that hot shower, and then the feeling of quitting would be so painful that it makes the suffering worthwhile. So he's bringing his ideal self into being by imagining what it would look like for him to get to the end of Hell Week, get to the end of the day, or the end of that surf torture. And so he says it's one step at a time forward, with the ideal in mind, and then also recognizing the consequences associated with the comfort of not confronting the darkness and the suffering of life. It's amazing. And Goggins is a very visual person, and he was struck by the visuals of the SEALs on the television. He was struck by Rocky, in the seventh or ninth round, when Rocky was on the ground and he gets back up, right? And the image of getting pummeled and rising, that struck Goggins. And there's a scene from Platoon where Willem Dafoe's character is getting shot in the back and he's running to the chopper, and he's just giving everything, every part of himself to move forward. And that struck Goggins. And it's this image, right? We all have these ideals that we don't even know exist, right? We have to bring them about. And that's why I talk about mentors, talk about role models. Huge. That is insanely important. But it's this question of, what is the reasoning for my suffering? And more so, what do I gain as a consequence to this suffering, right? That's huge. And so the overarching narrative to this is the initiation story, the willingness to shed the old ideas that you invested in for so long and you believed in for so long, and incorporating the new, which requires more internal resources to do so. Another way is to look inwards to the dark parts of the psyche. That's the part of you that wants to quit, the part of you, when you hit your levels of tolerance, there's that part of you saying, no, I don't want to go there. It's a little bit, it's colder than I'm used to. It's the school program is more difficult than I'm used to, or the anxiety and the panic that I'm stepping into is more intense than I'm used to. And we like to flee from those environments. But when we're in the suffering, and we decide to stay because we know that our ideal self can come about when we're in that thick, thick, thick hell. We stay and we confront that voice that thinks, nope, you're incapable. Nope, you're weak. Nope, you're this and you're that. And you're battling yourself in that moment. And you're confronting the shadow side of your psyche because you're confronting the thing you want to avoid. You want to avoid. You know, this is a predatory entity. And you have to confront the not only the places that you find uncomfortable, but the places of the mind that bring about the monsters, the seller of monsters. And so those are the predatory entities that elicit that threat response. You know, when you're sitting at home and then there's this internal voice that you repress and you ignore for so long that's telling you to, well, I got to look for a job or a better job. I'm being tyrannized at work. I'm fat. I'm weak. I'm lazy. I drink too much. I have really dramatic and unsupportive friends. I'm bitter towards women or I'm bitter towards men. I haven't gotten over the loss of someone close to me that died. And so you have to first acknowledge those faults. That's confronting the shadow side of the psyche. Confronting that is no joke. Confronting truth. Carl Jung says, the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict, and be turned into opposing halves. So that's interesting. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside. And we see that play out all the time. So, for me, one of my biggest insecurities is being too agreeable and naive. And so when I come into contact with somebody who's naive and agreeable, I don't like that in them because I notice it in me and I don't like it within me. So I get more frustrated towards that person. Or, I'm searching out a certain woman, for example, that is naive so I can take advantage of them. Or maybe I'm looking for a type of woman that share the same hedonic, what would you say, values that I share. And then I go to my friends or my family and I say, well, all women are this. It's like, is it all women or is it you? Well, it can't be all women by, default. That's dumb. It's you. It's too many, that's crazy. It's crazy. The unconscious id, the id Freud talks about, which I talked about a couple podcasts ago, the id being the impulses, the desires, the drives, right? The sexual hunger, the aggression, the unconscious id movement to chaos leads to disorder. So the unconscious id movement to chaos, when you're satisfying the hunger with junk and you're satisfying the sex with pornography and, one night stands or the aggression in unhealthy ways, it leads to disorder. Whereas careful, voluntary movement towards that leads to control, leads to self-mastery. And to separate yourself from certain chaos, You have to have awareness and contend with this pull, this urge. And so the meaning is found in this battle and overcoming the urges. And it's not, that's the thing, it's not just the dopamine you experience when you attain the goal, because when you're moving forward, like Dr. Peterson points out, that movement towards the goal elicits the positive emotion. If there's no goal, you're not going to experience the positive emotion. We have to have a goal. But it's not just the dopamine, but it's the return to homeostasis when you separate yourself from pornography or the cell phone or the attention and the drug and alcohol, right? Returning to a natural way of being, no longer being in the grip of craving and distraction. You feel better. You feel better physically and mentally, especially, but you have to separate yourself because you don't know a life without it if you're continuously using, right? The id is a bottomless pit. It's a dog that, it's a dog that can't be satisfied and is constantly hungry and it's constantly aggressive. So you will never be satiated, right? It's you have to satisfy it in very primitive ways, like the gym with aggression, physical exercise, right? It's a never-ending pursuit. But the thing is, so is growth, because you can make that argument saying, well, look, growth is never ending. Why can't I just be in the pursuit of, say, sex and, you know, just do that in my life? Well, you could, but if you pay attention to those who do that, look where they wind up. Look at someone like Charlie Sheen, for example, and just observe where they wind up, right? But the unconscious id is a devouring monster. Like I said, it's devouring, and it leads to more snacks, right? It leads to more pornography. It leads to more snakes, because snakes are associated with the thing you're pursuing, the id like thing you're pursuing. But you know, it the food makes us more unhealthy, or it makes us more anxious, depressed, fat, isolated. It destroys us. But the growth of conscious control leads to a clean conscience. That's huge. And a clean conscience is a lightness that no money can ever buy. No money can buy that. No money can buy that, the look that you get when you see yourself in the mirror and you get up early, even though you don't want to. You go to the gym and you're losing weight and you're going on a strict diet, and you look at yourself in the mirror and you go, man, you're the old you wouldn't do that. And you look at you. Your mind is sharper. You feel more tough. You look tough, healthy, attractive. That's truth. That's truth. When you separate yourself from the commercialism, consumerism, materialism, where society as a whole doesn't want you to be healthy and conscious of all of your flaws. It wants to keep you unconscious as much as possible. And it seems to me that a return to primitive man and the battle of the pressing superego, the battle of culture, that brings meaning, right? Returning to a simpler way of being, a healthier, primitive way of being, that brings meaning. It brings, what would you say? It brings positive emotion, because it's goal oriented, and it's very difficult, it's not so difficult to sit on a couch and binge a Netflix show and to order some Chinese food. It's going to bring you a lot of dopamine for sure. It's satisfying. I would love to do that every day, to be honest. But I did do that. And it brought me a lot of anxiety. It brought me a lot of meaninglessness because I get bored of the Chinese food. I get bored of the 2 a.m. Netflix. I got bored of it. And then the thing that Dostoevsky pointed out in Notes from Underground, he said, you give people all of that. You satiate them with sex and food and all the good stuff. They're going to burn it down so something interesting happens. And what brought meaning in my life was saying no to the id impulses, saying no, no, I'm not going to order Chinese food. I'm actually going to eat a steak instead. I'm going to get up early in the morning rather than sleep in. I'm going to stop watching pornography. And because I want to value women. And not just that though, I want to I feel more weak and I'm idolizing I'm idolizing Tinkerbell, something that's not real. You know, contending with a real woman, that's difficult. And so when you've sorted out much of your life, you can then add more responsibility into your life, more novelty to enhance the meaning because you are bringing about bigger goals, which in turn create positive emotion in pursuit of them. And that's the Atlas symbol, right? In Greek mythology, the wise man bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders. What does that mean? You're taking on maximal responsibility. And the struggle with that is what brings you closer to the transcendent, brings you closer to God, brings you closer to meaning. Why? Well, the tolerance that you gain as a consequence, the self-respect and confidence. I mean, I've had clients who've quit pornography, who quit smoking, who've quit, eating processed foods, and the look on their face is no joke. It's like when Simba in The Lion King becomes a man and his face hardens, becomes more serious. That's what happens when you contend with the darkness and you contend with the shadow elements of your psyche. You harden as a consequence. You're no longer being tyrannized over the id impulses. That's huge. Why would you want to be a slave to all of these things? You're not in control. It's like, who's typing this message? Who's ordering this food? What is that? I recognize that in me where I would do things automatically and not think about it. This thing would have a hold. Shopping, for example, is a big one. And so when you conquer that and you gain control, what happens? Well, you kind of minimize the amount of time and resources you put into that thing, and more space opens up in your psyche like a garage that's being cleaned out. So Atlas is bearing all the weight of the culture pressing down on him, right? The world pressing down on him. And he's wrestling back at the world, conquering it with his humongous muscles and his strength. That's the image we should be striving for. The great burdens of existence make a man wise and great. That's why Atlas is the wise man. And that increases your level of tolerance. And what does it more than bearing that weight? And that's where I'm going to leave you on this podcast episode. Thank you, everyone, for being here, being a listener. I really appreciate it. I love you all very much. Rise above anxiety. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now. My anxiety recovery program is available over at unpluganxiety.com. Included is the Releasing Trauma exercise. This is where you can walk through and release past trauma using an NLP-based audio recording by myself. That's at unpluganxiety.com. Go there to learn more.